Hello, and welcome back to another episode of How to Leave a Cult. I am your host, Brooke Walker, and I think today's episode is going to be really interesting. There are some things that we got into last episode that we're going to open up today. Last episode, we talked about dating and then the house that I lost. But this episode, I kind of want to go back into a relationship that was a real catalyst for me. We're also going to talk about shame. I feel like you can't discuss toxic religious abuse without talking about shame. And I want to talk about how that emotion affects us. And I also want to talk about how we can heal some of the damage of what's called toxic shame. So, um, this is How to Leave a Cult. How to Leave a Cult is my biographical story of years living in a religious cult that I grew up in, that we joined when I was young. When I was a child, my parents joined it. And the experiences I had within that cult, the religious abuse that occurred because of it, and what I've done to heal from it. So if this is your first time listening, welcome. Hopefully, you will come back to listen to other episodes. Maybe start from the beginning if you want to hear it from the beginning. I try to talk about my experience and have some vulnerability so that other people can begin to heal on their journey from religious abuse. And then I also talk about the psychology, throw in a little science, and welcome. So, I'm going to go back into a relationship that I started talking about in my last episode, which was a relationship that I got into when I was started dating. And I dated for years and remained single for a long time, but I eventually met this person. If I remember right, I'm pretty sure we met online. And I kind of glossed over that relationship last time I was talking about it because there were some other things I wanted to get in there. But I'm going to go back into that relationship because it was a catalyst that had a lot of effects in what happened in the cult, but also I would say it was another thing that was a piece that got me out of the cult because of how destructive and damaging the whole relationship was and how it was perceived within the cult. Now, I'm going to kind of go and I'm going to jump around a little bit, but I'm going to bring it all back together in the end, I promise, and kind of explain why. So, and it's a little hard for me to talk about because I'm still kind of processing and healing some of the stuff around this. So this isn't the easiest episode for me to dive into. And I am really working on my emotions about this situation because of multiple different things that make it difficult for me. First off, it's why I decided we're going to talk about shame today. And um, I'm also going to, the other thing I want to kind of mention is that at the end of last season, I started getting into and had Lane Camp as a guest on my podcast, which was fascinating. It was fascinating for me to learn things about where the cult started and how Trina and Stephen Camp created it. There was some interesting things, which is something that, Lane Camp was often referred to as the golden boy because he was Trina's blood son. They adopted some other sons, but he was the blood son. And he got away with a lot. Around the same time, a book came out that was written by Daniel Wrench, and he is in chess.com. He helped build chess.com, but he also was the son of Stephen Wrench, who was one of the main ministers in the church. So, two of the main sons of two of the main ministers in the church, and something that occurred to me when those two things happened, this book came out and I had Lane on my podcast, was the difference in the way that people were treated in the cult. And it was astounding. And for some reason, it hadn't occurred to me at the time. I had in my mind that we were all treated the same, and that we all got the same level of abuse and we all got the same level of favors within some certain amount. There were some differences, but I always thought that it was like on the same playing field. And then I realized after talking to Lane, and I still haven't read Danny's book, but after talking to Lane and Danny coming out with his story and listening to one of the podcasts that he was on, that there was a huge discrepancy. And as a single mother, I was treated like a piece of shit. Any women that were in the church that were single moms were treated like pieces of shit. We were liabilities. We didn't have value and worth to give, probably because most of it was financially based. And we were used, I believe, to control different men, but also to be whored off to men. And so when I originally got divorced from Colin and he left, there was this huge difference in the amount of attention that I got, positively and negatively, because I think that there was some part that I was just not of value in the same way anymore. And him not being a good cult member was a part of that too. So when he left, I don't know that it was this huge loss to the cult necessarily, but there was definitely a control factor, right? So I did not know these things at the time, right? I'm under the belief that I'm in this spiritual system, that I'm just trying to do things that are going to be things that are good and of value, and that are going to be, seen by God in some way, that's going to help me to grow and to be a spiritual woman, and I'm making steps to do that. At the same time, I'm trying to have some fun in my life and be a 20-something year old with 2 kids, and grow 2 human beings to be good people. And there was always this thing that Duran talked about, and it's ridiculous, absolutely fucking ridiculous, about 12 men. And I feel like Trina watched, 12 Angry Men and then just made this shit up. But there was always this thing that 12 men, that Duran was looking for 12 spiritual men. It never had anything to do with looking for 12 spiritual women, but it was like 12 spiritual men. And it was like the women were going to bring these men to this status or some level of fucking bullshit. I mean, it was all bullshit, right? But it was another way that I felt like in this group that I was in, that I was raised in, this cult, the Church of Immortal Consciousness, I was constantly told that women were not of the same value as men, even though we were consistently told that this was a female-led teaching. And it wasn't. But I get into this relationship with this guy, and we're going to call him Bilbo because I think it's funny and I just want to call him Bilbo. And that was obviously not his name. I'm not going to say his name, but so I'm dating this man, Bilbo, and we have this horrible breakup, and I make the mistake of getting back together with him weeks later. Now, by then, I have, in about 2 hours, moved out of his house, and I have moved back to Payson. and I'm now living with my parents. And in this validation of this relationship, that to me is this performance in a lot of ways, I'm trying to build myself up as the kind of person I'm trying to build myself up as the kind of person that I want to be, but also trying to, bring him in. So now we've broken up, and I think it's because I haven't been close enough because I moved in with him. And so I was kind of a little bit farther away. And so I'm like revalidating myself, and I'm getting myself back into going to trance all the time and being involved with everybody and going back to processes and getting ripped to shreds by the women and all these different people. And I think that this is how I'm going to find my way back to God and say salvage a spiritual relationship, because there was always this gaslighting that the reason it's not going well enough for you is because you're not close enough to God, and you're not in the teaching, and you're not close to the women, and you're not this and you're not that. And so it was always this doom and this shame that I felt. And so we get back together, and I'm like all in, and I'm like going to make this work. But there was these constant moments of, I mean, there was a million reasons why me and him were not a good fit together. But at the time, I mean, it was a perfect fit because for the person that was in this performance, he fit into that with me. And so we get back together. He proposes to me. And if I remember right, it was on my 30th birthday. He proposes to me, and I'm like, okay, like this is it. You know, this is the person that's going to be uh, the man that's going to fulfill this life that me and him are going to have together, right? And we're going to have more kids, and he's agreed to have more kids with me, even though he decided he was never going to have kids again, and he's going to marry me, even though he said he was never would never get married again. So we get back together, and we're living together, and we're renting a place around the corner, so we're living in fucking Tano Village, around the corner from everybody. And it was doomed. It was never going to be anything more than what it was. And it it was doomed much quicker now that we were back involved and in the village with everybody. Because prior to that, there was this part that our relationship was not involved with everybody. But I had him coming to trance now, and he got ripped up to shreds by Duran at one point. And I don't even remember the catalyst that ended the relationship. I just remember it was always bad. And I remember we fought about each other, and we fought about our kids. He was desperately trying to find work, which he couldn't do in Payson. And so I finally realized one day that it was not going to work. And I'm pretty sure I was the one who called it. And I remember being devastated because I felt like that this relationship I had put everything into, because I was in such comparison to my relationship that I had had with Colin. And I felt like every relationship I had to make this spiritual performance, that it had to live up to this expectation, which was never anything anybody could live up to, which was all based on what the cult had put on me and what the ministers had preached about relationships and about God and about all these different things. And I'm working 3 jobs at this point to try to make it all work. And so me and him break up, and he moves out, and I'm still living there with my kids. And I was a train wreck. And part of what had happened is it's like the failure that I had from that from my relationship with my ex-husband that I had had my kids with, when this one failed, that like exemplified and doubled all of the emotions that went with it. And this impending doom of being a failure of a person just devastated me. So I was heartbroken, but I was also emotionally devastated that who I was in this community had no value. All of a sudden, everything in who I was worthless. And that I had created this relationship out of my own will, that this wasn't something that God had put together, that I was just creating karma for myself, things that would be horrible, right? Like, because there was always this talk in the cult about that we're here to, karma was a negative term. Karma wasn't like good and bad and all that kind of stuff in the way that I understand it now. Karma in the cult was all bad, unless you were getting rid of old karma that you had created in the past or in other lifetimes. Otherwise, karma was solely a negative thing. And so I went to a trance after me and Bilbo broke up, and Duran ripped me to shreds. And he told me that I would have been better off being a prostitute. This is the leader of our teaching, not just the ministers. This is like the word of God. And at the time, I mean, I think I was a puddle on the ground. Because not only had I lost this relationship that I thought was going to be meaningful for me, I also publicly in front of the entire congregation was told that I would have been better off being a fucking prostitute rather than having decided to be in that relationship that had never been spiritually ordained. So I was at an all-time low. All-time low. And I have, from the age of being somewhere around 14, was the first time that I fainted and I started having heart problems. And all of a sudden I would have this my heart rate would increase, and it would feel like my heart was beating out of my chest. And it had escalated when I had gotten divorced from Colin, to the point that I remember driving my kids around when they were really little and having to pull over on the side of the road because I thought I was going to faint while I was driving. I never did, but um, when this relationship came to an end, there was multiple times that I was ripped up by different people in the cult, ministers, um, my sister-in-law at the time. Like, I had walked into a room one day thinking that I was just going to go hang out with other people in our generation, and I just got torn to shreds. And one of the things that I was consistently getting yelled at about in this relationship was because, like, I it was the first time that I had like enjoyed having a sex life, and there was some part of that that really got twisted and used against me. And it's very interesting. Like, I'm going to go on another rant because I think it's interesting. I think so when it comes to, and I think that this is important when we talk about trauma and we talk about healing trauma and we talk about shame, we can't also not touch on the subject of sex, because I think that that's an important other factor. And I was just listening to this podcast, and there's a woman who wrote a book called Come As You Are. She is a sex educator, and so she has done tons of research on it. And sex is one of those interesting things that works like a car, as far as like we have a gas pedal and we have a brake pedal. And one of the keys to sex is that you can't just put on the gas, you also have to take the foot off the brake. And I think that, meaning that, like, it's not just about arousal, it's about removing things that get in the way, and growing up in a religiously abusive environment under a lot of shame, my brake pedal on so many levels had been glued to the floor. Like, I think religious shame basically puts a parking brake on. So even if you are trying to enjoy what is something that we should be able to enjoy in life, we're not able to do it because we have the parking brake on. So we're driving around attempting to be part of something and get into healthy relationship with somebody and engage in intimacy in a very normal way. But what happens is we have this parking brake on and we have one foot on a brake pedal, and then we're trying to put the gas on it and we wonder why our wheels are spinning. And for women, it's even worse because we are raised in an environment, even if you're not raised in a religiously suppressive environment, women are still raised in an environment where we're very second when it comes to this kind of stuff. So I am in this relationship with this person, and because I was enjoying the escape on a level of like, we used to spend time going and going to the lake and like doing fun things, and also enjoyed, like, for the first time having some semblance of a sex life. And then when I moved back and get close back into the cult, it was like the impending weight of that I had destroyed my life by trying to get in a relationship with a person that wasn't ordained, by giving myself into like sex and wanting to enjoy that part of my life, and by, basically denying this level of spirituality that I should have been involved in. So now I have like I have created what I'm told is all this karma that I'm going to now have to figure out how I have to work through and deal with. And this physical issue that I had been having since I was 14 all of a sudden came to a head. And my ability to manage my stress was gone. Gone. And I'm working 3 jobs. I'm being a nail tech on the side, and I have to start working at the school. Like I was required to start working at the school, and I'm getting paid, I think I was getting paid like $4 an hour. And then I'm also working at a steakhouse. And I am physically and I am emotionally barely getting through every day. And I feel closed in and disconnected to all the people around me because I just feel just this huge weight of everybody's judgments, because it's always this public thing. When you've done something, everybody is in on it, and everybody gets to cast their judgment on you. You're like free to be open to anybody being able to tell anything they want to you at the most degrading level. And I've gotten it from Dr. Duran at the time. I've gotten it from the ministers. I've gotten it from other women in the cult. Like, being brought down to this level of being a piece of shit. And I think that the weight of all the stress finally came to a head at that moment. And I think that once this relationship took a shit and my physical health took a shit, it was a real catalyst for where I was going next. And I think it's fascinating. I think that I was like I remember one of the women. This is something that I don't think people realize. Your ability to get access to help in this day and age is amazing. Like, you had to buy a book, you had to buy a course, you had to go to a seminar back then. Like, you can find everything online. You can sit and watch videos. Like, there's a lot of misinformation out there now, but back then you were lucky to find any information. So, one of the women gave me cassette tapes on breathing. We didn't have other access or resource to things like that. So she gives me these cassette tapes on how to breathe, because I'm having these, what I think are panic attacks at the time. I go into these panic attacks where I can't breathe, where I feel like I'm going to die. And I'm going to the doctor. I start going to the doctor, and they're like, well, we don't see anything wrong with you. Like, you seem fine. Maybe it's in your head. So, all this shame turned into this physical manifestation, and all this stress, you know, 20 years of stress that had been compounding and just getting more and more and more, got me to this point that I was just a mess, and I was working all the time like a crazy person. So, we're going to kind of dive back into that on our next episode, but I want to talk about shame, because I really want to give this a little bit of time today. And there's So I'm going to give you guys some resources. If you're interested, you can check these out. But I'm also going to talk about 4 steps to overcome what's called toxic shame. And toxic shame was something that was the term was coined by John Bradshaw, and this actually goes back to 1990. And I'm going to read this to you, and these are things that are actually out of his book. But shame is the belief that I am a flawed human being. And he has a book called Healing the Shame That Binds You. I have not read it, but I do like this quote out of it. If our primary caregivers are shame-based, they act shameless and pass their toxic shame on to us. There's no way to teach self-value if one does not value oneself. Toxic shame is multi-generational. It is passed from one generation to the next. Shame-based people find other shame-based people and get married. As each member of a couple carries the shame from his or her own family system, their marriage will be grounded in their shame core. The major outcome of this lack of intimacy is it's difficult to let someone get close to you if you feel defective and flawed as a human being. So I think that's fascinating. I think anybody who gets into the level of a cult that we were in, that you have to have some version of shame being a very big factor for you. And I think that Trina and Stephen Camp and the ministers in the church, I think that that was one of the biggest resources that they would cultivate in people is shame. So I want to talk about how do we overcome shame. And I also want to talk about some of the mechanisms of what shame does. So reading a little bit about shame today, I thought there were some interesting things. So shame is what's called a primary emotion, and meaning that it is a direct emotion, which means, and one of the reasons that we have it is that it is there to create safety. So if healthy shame is created in somebody, what happens is you're a little child, and let's say you go running because you're excited, and maybe you go running because you see a pool of water and you're excited, so you go running toward the pool. What happens is that your parent might yell and scream, "Stop!" Whatever it is, right? And then as a little child, you would be like shooken a little bit, and you might start crying because you're surprised, and all of a sudden you have this feeling of shame, right? Then your mom or your dad would come over and they'd be like, "Okay, honey, it's okay." And give you a hug and say, "I just don't want you to get hurt. You don't know how to swim yet." Right? That would be a normal interaction in the way that shame should go through. But what happens internally in the body is something interesting too. So when shame is turned on, it actually turns on. So I'm going to talk about the autonomic nervous system, which I've talked about before, but that's the way that our nervous system reacts. So when I was talking about the fact that I had too much stress and it had brought on physical issues, that is a real thing. And it's because of our autonomic nervous system. So our autonomic nervous system is what turns on fight or flight or rest and digest. Fight or flight is when your sympathetic nervous system kicks in. So when you automatically go into a reaction like shame, your sympathetic nervous system turns on. When your parent comes to hug you and tell you everything's okay, your parasympathetic nervous system turns on. And the parasympathetic nervous system is there to tell you, you're okay. You're okay. Like you're in a safe space. So when shame comes up and that fight or flight turns on and we go into this freeze, or we go into this, oh my gosh, your body will flood with adrenaline, your heart rate will increase, your brain turns off, all because it's doing this stuff because it's there to keep you safe, because the whole thing is to learn something from this incident so you don't recreate it, and it's a survival mechanism. When shame has turned into something toxic, then it turns on just by thinking about things or these experiences that should not cause this, but maybe it's been pushed on you. And it's been pushed on you because you're in an environment that is trying to manipulate you and that is trying to create fear in you. So normal things that most people go through on a daily basis and don't think much about all of a sudden have become something toxic for you. So maybe you're 10 years away from having been in some negative environment, but because you had an emotional reaction to something where you went into this fight or flight, you somebody says something to you and it all of a sudden triggers you into this fight or flight again, and you are the shame-based person you were 10 years ago, even though you have been out of that system for a long time. So how do you get out of that? How do you fix and heal that? And I'm going to tell you. I'm going to tell you a couple different ways. So, there's 4 steps to be overcoming toxic shame. And this is from Shirley Davis wrote this, and it's from a site if you have any interest in going and looking it up, but it's from cptsdfoundation.org, and that's complex post-traumatic stress disorder. Am I saying that right? I feel like I messed that up. Anyway, PTSD, right? Post-traumatic stress disorder. Sorry. All of a sudden that's not coming to me. Anyway, foundation.org. So it's, but complex PTSD. CPTSD foundation.org. That took too long to explain. Anyway, but Shirley Davis wrote that there's 4 steps to overcome toxic shame. I'm not going to read them exactly the way she wrote them. I'm going to give them my spin on it. But the first one is that you need to develop self-love. Love and shame don't spend a lot of time in the same place unless it's a healthy level of shame. Because if you love yourself well enough, you're not going to sit and beat yourself up forever. So you need to develop a lot of self-love. You're not going to beat yourself up if you love yourself. You're going to go, that happens. Oh my gosh, that was a mistake. Oh, there's something I can learn from this experience. And if you were a healthy child learning shame, that's what happened. You ran and you stopped because your parents yelled, and you're like, oh, it's okay. It was a mistake. That's healthy. It's healthy to learn from something that could be dangerous. It is not healthy to stay in a constant state of fear when you're safe. Number 2, develop a positive dialogue. So I think I've shared this, and if I have, I'm going to share it again. And if I haven't, it needs to be said. One of the best things that you can do is to change the way that you talk to yourself. And there's been different studies about the amount of thoughts that any person has on any given day. A new study says it's somewhere closer to 6,000. A study back in the day said it was like 70 to 90,000 thoughts a day. It really doesn't matter how many thoughts we're having a day. What is important is the percentage of those that is positive versus negative. And they estimate that more than 80% of the thoughts that we have every day are negative. Not just about us, but about others. And the other thing that they have estimated is that about 90% of our thoughts are the same thoughts we had yesterday. So, learning to cultivate more positive thinking about yourself is going to have a huge impact, because just changing a thought or two in a week means that 90% of what you continuously think is going to be repetitive positively, not negatively. I spent 20 years grounding in negative thoughts that came from other people. By the time that I had all this heart stuff going on, and by the time I was having all these um, panic attacks at the end of that relationship, I spent another 10 years, well, probably not quite 10 years, 5 plus after that. And then I had to start cultivating positive thinking. I was a pessimist. It wasn't the easiest thing in the world, but it's so impactful to start having positive things and the ways that you talk to yourself. And so I started just doing, I've talked about mirror work. You know, you sit in the mirror and you say something good to yourself about who you are. And some of it's going to feel very foreign because you haven't done enough of it. But you have to understand that a lot of what you thought is because other people said it and other people did it. And now you have to take what they said away and put in new positive thinking. Read stuff that's positive. Listen to stuff that's positive. Listen to motivational stuff, anything that brings you up and that can bring a little bit something wonderful into how you think about yourself. There's a lot of negative out there. You have to not follow that. You have to create a path of positivity about who you are, and you have to change the way you talk about yourself and talk about the people around you. Loving things. If you wouldn't say it to the 5-year-old version of yourself, you probably shouldn't say it to whatever age version of yourself you're talking to right now. Number 3, you need to mourn the wounds. This is the one I'm having trouble with right now because that tears me up. You have to mourn the wounds. You have to acknowledge and give space to whatever it is that created where you are right now. So if you do have some version of shame, you need to acknowledge what it was that caused that. And bring a lot of self-love and positive dialogue into that space. And then the last one's a good one too. Number 4, you have to learn self-forgiveness. Forgiveness is a beautiful thing when it comes to other people, but the hardest person I think that we ever have to forgive is ourselves. Because you probably learned things at an age where you were not responsible. And then when you took them into adulthood and you became the responsible party, you used those things. And it could have been drinking and smoking and drugs and sex and food and all these different ways you found to make yourself feel better. And it can be people. So you learn that when you were young, and then you exploit it at an adult age. And then at some point you have to forgive yourself for the fact that that's the way that you learned how to deal with your bullshit. And I don't mean that even in a negative way. It's just like, although I did call it your bullshit, it was my bullshit too, you know? So I was taught a certain way to do things. And so then, like drinking, like I was taught that drinking was how I was going to deal with all the stress in my life. That didn't get me anywhere except for alcoholism. You were taught something too. But at some point, you have to forgive yourself. And this takes a lot of self love and positive dialogue. And, you know, understanding that things happened. And you deserve that. Because on the other side of healing and on the other side of me doing these episodes is peace. It's joy and peace. And I deserve that. And you deserve that. And that is the only reason I still show up and do this podcast, is to create more joy and peace for me and hopefully affect a few people that can also find a little more joy and peace. Thank you for listening. I hope this was impactful for you. And as always, I love you guys. Bye-bye.